Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Oliver Judd and I'm the Executive Director of NECA New South Wales and ACT, and welcome to today's Asbestos Safety Webinar. I'll be the facilitator of today's presentation, and you can ask questions by raising your hand by clicking on the hand icon shaped button on the screen, or you can ask questions in the question box and simply type your questions and we will respond to them at the appropriate time. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available on NECA's YouTube channel for later reference. And on that note, we'd like to thank you for taking part in today's presentation, and I'll now hand you over to Matthew Heap.
Good afternoon, guys. So what I'll be covering is the key aspects of asbestos safety, how it's applied in the WHS legislation, and the practicality aspects for our industry and working with it. So the starter is why all the fuss? Why are people talking about it now more so than before? So you see the first slide, why the fuss? The first key one is a guy by the name of Mr. Fluffy. He was a contractor in Canberra and the outer regions of Canberra as well, in the 1950s and 60s. What he did was he imported raw asbestos or loose asbestos into the ACT. He imported it into ACT and pumped it into roof cavities and walls as a form of insulation. As such, down the track, many years down the track, you've got electricians drilling into walls, putting in power points, etc., and it's coming out. It's posed a massive problem for homeowners, and now the ACT government are going through the process of removing it, but again, it's taking its time. Another driving factor for the advanced focus on asbestos is the rise in exposure and the rates behind it. Currently, Australia has one of the highest rates of exposure in relation to asbestos-related disease. We are one of the highest users with asbestos prior to 1980s due to the use of asbestos. It can be used in many aspects, especially heat resistant. So has the highest, and we have the highest reported incident rate as well. So we intend, from an Australia point of view, will peak in terms of exposure from 2014 to 2021. So if anything, it's going to get higher. So it's really due to the fact that that we really would see a high rate in exposure. So in light of that, the office, well, not an office, but the government came to a conclusion that there needed to be a management review. So multiple experts in that particular area of asbestos undertook a report which went, I think, in the process of 2 years. And the main objective of that report was to make recommendations in order to really develop a strategic plan, a national strategic plan that incorporates all states to manage and control asbestos within Australia. So you can see there under Asbestos Management Review Report that the main objective was to make recommendations for the development of a national strategic plan to improve asbestos awareness and management. So there's a link there to that if you guys want to copy it down, feel free. The National Asbestos Strategic Plan, it was development of that plan was a key recommendation of that management review. There was multiple recommendations from the management review, but the key one was to make a strategic plan that incorporates all states to minimise exposure, but also coordinate a strategic approach to managing within Australia. So formally there are two forms of asbestos, one being friable, which means it's a containing material that is a powder form. It can be called loose. They can be crumbled, pulverized, reduced to a powder by hand pressure when dry. And this is the most lethal form per se. It can only be removed by licensed removalists being Class A. So anybody within an industry that hasn't got a license mustn't remove friable asbestos. The other form is non-friable, essentially meaning it's bonded by some type of compound, which can't be broken down easily, but still can be broken down. So generally speaking, they're the two types. You can go a lot further in. There's more finer types, but from a broad approach, it's friable and non-friable. So its application in the WHS legislation. Generally speaking, there's a prohibition on working with asbestos. That's the broad approach. And you can see there, there's an excerpt taking out of the legislation. A person conducting a business or undertaking, which is essentially an employer, must not carry out or direct or allow a worker to carry out work involving asbestos if that work involves manufacturing, supplying, transporting, storing, removing, using, installing, handling, treating, disposing or disturbing asbestos or ACM. ACM being an asbestos-containing material, except in prescribed circumstances. So the final prohibition came in the 31st of December 2003. So that's when it was finally outlawed once and for all. Prior to that, it was still being used. Under that, it's an excerpt out of legislation being there's an exception, prescribed circumstance, and that is maintenance of or service work on non-friable asbestos or ACM fixed or installed before 31st December 2003. So that basically captures our industry. A lot of our work is done on switchboards at domestic houses that are prior to 2003, and that exception there allows us to undertake that work without actually having the prohibition. Okay, so removal of asbestos by a person does not hold a Class A or Class B. So there, Class A are guys who would remove all your friable asbestos and anything larger than 10 square metres. So keeping in mind with the prohibition of asbestos work, there's an exception being the maintenance or service work on non-friable asbestos, but also it has to be under 10 square metres of non-friable being bonded. So you see there, approximately the size of a small bathroom. That still allows not only our industry but other industries to still undertake work without being restricted by some sort of really restriction within the legislation. So you can see there, so you're allowed to work on 10 square metres or less of non-friable, but also asbestos contaminated dust or debris, ACD, there's no more than a minor contamination. Again, that could be open for interpretation. And is associated with the removal of the 10 square metres. So obviously when you're drilling into a switchboard or something similar, it's bonded. Once you drill into it, it becomes friable or loose asbestos. But that bit there basically covers that area. So the key part in all of this is being able to identify it in the first place in the workplace. That's where training workers comes in. New legislation, along with training instruction from a safety point of view to train your workers, they pulled that out and basically made the requirement for training workers in relation to asbestos mandatory for people who may will think that their workers may become exposed to asbestos during their part of work. Again, it captures our industry. There's no guarantee as to when workers will be exposed to asbestos, but it's fair to say that a lot of work's done on switchboards in domestic houses, subfloors on half-developed projects, that there would be asbestos there. So again, it's a key area. You're playing with fire if you don't intend to train your guys in relation to asbestos, but also helps in the long run that you meet legislative requirements, but part of that knowledge is that guys can walk on site, know how to identify it, know how to work with it. Part of the view with asbestos now is the type of that it's scary. People put their hand up and walk away. The last thing we want from an industry point of view is for guys to put their hands up, walk away and not deal with it. It's here to stay. So in saying that, that's where the training with workers lends itself to, that these guys have got to learn to work with and control it for what's reasonable. So you can see there's an excerpt that's been taken out of legislation, and it indicates that guys need to be trained in identification, safe handling, and suitable control measures for asbestos and ACM. Records have to be kept for the training, being 5 years after the work ceases or the work ceases. Longer if a person is exposed to asbestos, etc. So it's broad, it's to the point, and from a NECA point of view, it's advisable to get all your guys trained in asbestos safety, so you don't really get your guys exposed to it on site and have those issues. All right, so part of the identification of asbestos, which is the key thing, if they can identify it, they control it. If they don't identify it in the first place, you lend yourself to the situation with the NBN network in Penrith, where guys did not know how to identify it on site, and as such took it up to street level and broke it down in domestic front yard. You can pin that down onto lack of training, lack of awareness, and that's where this bit fits in, which should be mandatory as part of the required training under legislation. So things that you guys should know: when was a building constructed? Asbestos was widely used as a construction installation material in buildings until the late 1980s. The use of asbestos was only completely prohibited on the 31st of December 2003. The bans were not absolute prior to 2003, and building materials may have been stockpiled. So again, that's a key area to keep an eye out for, that you guys should be trained in as well. Were there any refurbishments or additions to the building prior to 31st December 2003? It's pretty, it says it right there. Any refurbishments or extensions to the original building prior to 1990 and potentially up to 31st December 2003 may have involved the use of asbestos. Another one: what type of material was used to construct the building? Again, it lends itself to the other 2 points. If there is a plant that was designed, built, or installed prior to 1st January 2004, the supplier, manufacturer, or designer of the plant should be consulted to find out if asbestos is present. If possible, obtain advice in writing. The other 2, pretty common: talk to workers who worked on the site for a long period of time. There's going to be a lot of circumstances where you don't have that avenue, where it's strictly just a domestic thing, where it's 4 hours and you're not going to have that guy to contact or talk to, but there are times when you can utilise that avenue and talk to workers, supervisors, site managers about if there's any asbestos on site. Again, there's an asbestos register that you can obtain from the principal contractor or builder, where they would have identified the location of asbestos if it is deemed to be on site. Visually inspect the workplace to identify asbestos. So that can be done during the course of work as well, keeping in mind that you guys are trained in a way that they're able to identify it in the first place. Okay, so this is a controversial one in some way. PPE, obviously it's a mandatory part with working on asbestos. Your key ones: RPEs, or respiratory protective equipment, overalls, footwear and gloves. So they're key 3 things that you guys should have in their vans or available. Keep in mind the work they do, that sometimes it can be stemmed down to a risk assessment, what's deemed reasonable, but generally speaking, that's what you should have. So with the respiratory protective equipment, a P2 mask would normally do for most aspects of the work that the industry does. If a risk assessment deems something more extensive, we'll then do so. But generally speaking, from a broad approach, most of the times when you do come across asbestos on domestic sites and switchboards, in walls, etc., a P2 mask would do. So it's essential to have that in your guys' vans so they can utilise it on site. Coveralls are another one. Sometimes guys are going to argue whether drilling in, say, 3 holes in a switchboard, you're going to need coveralls. Yes and no. It can be seen as best practice to use coveralls to as a form of barrier between the asbestos become friable when you're drilling, or not so, and that the P2 mask is sufficient enough. Again, a risk assessment would deem what's reasonable, but again, that's best practice. Footwear and gloves, standard practice. Lace boots should be avoided, as they can be difficult to clean. And asbestos dust can gather in the laces and eyelets. So that's pretty basic. So obviously all you guys would be wearing boots that don't have laces and eyelets. The use of gloves should be determined again by risk assessment. If significant amounts of asbestos fibres may be present, disposable gloves should be worn. Again, it should be disposable, and they should never use something that they should keep and use again. Most of the stuff should be disposable and disposed in appropriate ways. Tools and equipment. So this is again a broad approach coming from relevant codes of practice in relation to asbestos management. Manually operated, so non-powered hand tools should be used wherever possible. If not possible, sufficient physical force to determine to perform the required operation, low-speed battery-powered tools that are able to be used in conjunction with wet methods, which I'll highlight later on, for dust control are preferred. So it doesn't put a prohibition on using powered tools, but has to be deemed appropriate in order to do so. Your first option should be manually operated, but from an industry point of view and the work that we do, most of the time a powered hand tool will be used like a drill. So, but again, that's an area to take into consideration when undertaking work. So when undertaking work with battery-powered tools, should be fitted with a local exhaust ventilation, LEV. This is a particular topic that sometimes may not be relevant. So, and it basically extracts the dust. From a cost point of view for industry, probably not the best, but an avenue that a lot of people won't go down because of that, being the cost, especially when there's other avenues to control the dust aspects when drilling into asbestos. And you see there, dust control methods including paste and gel should be utilised, which I will go into a bit further. So tools and equipment. This is a list of particular tools and equipment that can be utilised when working on asbestos. Again, you could see that as a list that all your guys should have in a van or your company vehicle. But again, it would come down to the type of work that you do and deemed by risk assessment from a company base as well. So generally speaking, disposable cleaning rags are recommended. Acrylic paint used as a sealant. So if you're drilling into asbestos, being bonded asbestos, that is, that once you make a drill cut or a hole, that it should be applied with a sealant. The best sealant is an acrylic paint, black acrylic paint, mostly because the backing of a switchboard is black to keep it in line or something similar. But mainly it's used as a sealant to seal the loose fibres around the drill holes or cracks, so it's not being exposed to additional tradespeople who are to work on that switchboard or particular piece of a wall or something in a house. Bucket of water can be attained on site, so again, that can be used from when decontaminating the site. Duct tape is, generally speaking, should have it as part of your van. Inexpensive again, same with the acrylic paint and cleaning rags. So it can be a form when drilling into something. The duct tape is placed over where you want to drill and you drill through the duct tape. So it's an essential part as well. So then it goes into a thickened substance such as wallpaper paste, shaving cream or hair gel. This is the most, for industry, we recommend the best way to do it without forking over a lot of money for a lot of expensive equipment is to utilise something like a gel or shaving cream. So from an industry point of view, when drilling into something, we recommend as part of the training, online training course that we have as well, to meet the requirements, is that placing gel or shaving cream over a hole, you can alternatively put a plastic cap over your drill bit, fill it with shaving cream or a gel, place that against where you intend to drill, and drill through it. Shaving cream and gels will capture all the fibres that come out of that, and then you dispose of the shaving cream and the cap appropriately. Again, that's the best way and the recommended way when drilling into ceilings. Obviously, if you're drilling into ceilings, fibres are likely to fall on top of you. So if you use a plastic cap to drill into a ceiling where all the fibres are captured within a shaving cream or gel, in a plastic cap is the best way. If you divert away from that, use another method. Make sure you use a method to capture the fibres that are falling. But again, the plastic cap, shaving cream or gel is the most inexpensive way to do that, but also maintain the fact that fibres aren't going to be exposed to you guys or into the area that you're working in. Plastic sheeting, it depends on the type of work you do. Bigger projects, yes, if you're working on a lot of asbestos, being under 10 square metres that is, or a large chunk of it. Suitable container being a disposal bag to dispose of equipment like the gels, like PPE, should be disposed in an appropriate asbestos graded bag. So most of them you'll have maybe a wording on the front being asbestos or something like similar like that, but there's appropriate providers out there on the internet that do provide Australian standard quality bags, removal bags and equipment. It says there drum or bin or skip line with plastic sheeting. That's for your bigger stuff. From an industry point of view and the work that we do, it's a smaller size. So your asbestos bags that can be easily put in the bin that don't take up too much room can be utilised. But again, if you're doing larger work that would deem a drum or bin to be utilised, then you would do so. Warning signs, again, it's more in relation to the bigger work where you have to advise members of the public or homeowners or some type of people that asbestos is in a particular area that you're working on. Most of the time it's of smaller nature, they wouldn't necessarily deem it, but it's something to take into consideration when your guys are doing work, as well as barrier tape. The key one is an asbestos grade vacuum cleaner. They are, first of all, very expensive, ranging from $1,200 to $1,500. It is recommended for best practice for your guys to be able to utilise a vacuum cleaner or an asbestos grade vacuum cleaner. So when they're walking out to an asbestos, like to a switchboard, for example, and there's fibres in there, upon initial assessment, they can remove that via the vacuum cleaner. Again, there's other avenues to control that, and that may be by using a wet rag when walking up and wiping it down and disposing of the rag, which then would be contaminated with asbestos, and removing it in an appropriate way, being an asbestos grade bag, etc. So there's ways of getting around it, but another thing that people can utilise to make sure the area that they're working on is free of asbestos fibres and not going to be exposed to it. Again, a sturdy paper foam or thin metal cup is what I covered. It says there only for work on overhead surfaces. Again, it can be used if you're not working on a ceiling. It's just a better way to capture fibres with the gel or shaving cream inside without making too much of a mess. So it can be utilised in both aspects. Okay, so decontamination of work areas. So there's two forms of decontamination or wet wiping. So wet decontamination is pretty self-explanatory. So it involves the use of damp rags to wipe down the contaminated area. So where you cut or any cracks in relation to the area that you're working in. Rags should only be used once, obviously, that once they're contaminated, dispose of it appropriately, although they may be refolded to expose a clean surface. That's when continually using it, but when you're disposing of it, make sure you're disposing of it in an appropriate way. If a bucket of water is used, rags should not be re-wetted in the bucket, as this will contaminate the water. If the water is contaminated, it must be treated as asbestos waste. Care should be taken to avoid any potential electrical hazards when using this procedure. Again, if it's energised, you're not going to be looking at doing any wet decontamination on a particular area. But again, if you've got the area de-energised or something that doesn't involve electrical hazard, it's probably the most utilised way to decontaminate a site. The other one is a dry decontamination. So basically it involves carefully rolling and folding up and sealing plastic sheeting or vacuuming the asbestos removal area with an asbestos vacuum cleaner. Dry decontamination should only be used where the wet method is not suitable or poses a risk because of other hazards such as electricity or slipping. So that's when I say that wet decontamination is the most utilised aspect because of the ease of use, and you're not making a mess, and the stuff you need to use can be easily accessible. Decontamination of tools is another key area. that should not be taken lightly. All tools used in asbestos removal work should be fully dismantled where appropriate. Most of the stuff that electricians use don't need to be dismantled, to a large extent that is. Cleaned under controlled conditions and decontaminated using either a wet or dry decontamination method. So not only would you decontaminate the site with a dry or wet method, you would decontaminate your tools with the same methods. Again, the most common one is with a wet method, being a wet rag, water, and disposing of the stuff that you use in an appropriate way in an asbestos grade bag, etc. So if the tools cannot be decontaminated in the asbestos removal work area or to be reused at another asbestos removal work area, they should be tagged to indicate that asbestos contamination or double bagged in asbestos labelled bags before removing from the asbestos removal work area. Again, everything that you bag should be double bagged and goosenecked as well, and again labelled with asbestos waste or something similar. Okay, so there's in essence, there's a lot of material out there that you can basically Google search and get a lot of information, but there's two formal publications that you can utilise, released by Safe Work Australia, but written in conjunction with the new WHS legislation. One being the Code of Practice, How to Safely Remove Asbestos. That is a broad approach. I find for industry it's the best one. Out of the two, you can see there being a Code of Practice on how to manage and control asbestos, safely remove. How to manage and control asbestos in the workplace is probably the best one. It's written in a way it's easily understandable, but broken down into areas that are applicable to our industry. Also has a procedure at the bottom of that particular document broken down steps on how to drill into switchboards for our industry. So it's got an example specifically for industry in order to utilise the right methods and procedures on how to work with asbestos on site. Code of Practice for How to Safely Remove Asbestos goes more into licensed removalists, so being Class A and Class B, something that hopefully you guys aren't getting into or doing, but it gives you an idea of what is expected of Class A and Class B licensed removalists, but also gives a bit of an indication and overlaps the information that's in how to manage and control asbestos in the workplace. So it does overlap to some extent, but in essence, both very informative publications that our members should be utilising in order to manage asbestos on site in a safe manner. And they're free, so anyone can get them from the website, which is, I haven't put it up, you can get them off Safe Work Cover New South Wales there, and they provide links through to Safe Work Australia, etc. So free, doesn't cost anyone anything, any money or anything like that, but a publication that should be utilised by everyone in industry, considering how really there's a lot of asbestos out there with the work that we do. So you should have the right knowledge, and this can provide the right knowledge in order for you to do the work safely. So again, if you want to get that one. A good website that can be utilised is ACT Asbestos Awareness. There's not many like this. ACT, due to their particular issue, being that there's loose asbestos in domestic housing in the ACT and the issue in ACT, they developed this website specifically for asbestos awareness. Other regulators, being New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, etc., don't have anything to this extent. It's very informative. It's not written in legislative jargon, so it's easy for the non-trained person or persons not familiar with legislation to understand their requirements. So again, it does say ACT, but a lot of it is applicable in New South Wales and its application.
Can we get a copy of this slideshow?
Yep. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to write them through or raise them. I'm happy to answer any questions in relation to the slides presented. But first question, can we get a copy of this slideshow? Absolutely, no doubt. Is there any other questions anyone would like to raise? All right, guys. Absolutely. We're here to provide a service and to make sure our guys and our membership are safe with the work that they do. So yeah, it's obviously it's what we're here for. All right, guys. So if there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up. But feel free to contact us directly if there's any questions or you need any information. But also this presentation will be available on YouTube if you want to review it again. All right, guys. Thanks a lot.